Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, also known as the monomyth. So the hero's journey is going to be a plot structure in which many films are based off of, novels, TV shows, short stories, you name it, it more than likely has the hero's journey in it. So Joseph Campbell came up with this term called monomyth. If we break down the word monomyth, mono means one, myth means story, and so here we have the story of one myth, one story that's usually focused on one character, and that is going to be the hero. But before we dig down into the hero's journey, I want to remind you of a plot structure that you probably learned in elementary school. So this is your normal plot diagram and structure for a story. First, you have your exposition, you're introduced to your characters, a little bit of background information, you're given a conflict of some sort, and then around the middle of the story, you have the rising actions occur that lead up to the climax, and then you're approaching the end of the story in your falling actions, and then your resolution occurs. Now, you are familiar with this, but Joseph Campbell said, you know what? Every story of a hero who has a task to complete, a quest, a journey, they also have a plot structure as well. Joseph Campbell says the hero starts off in what we would call the ordinary world or their normal world. So here's your hero, and then they get called to go on an adventure. They meet a mentor, and they cross this little threshold here into an unknown territory. They're then going to encounter trials and failure. They may meet friends and recognize who their enemies are. They're going to create growth and new skills. Then they're going to face his or her greatest fears, and out of that moment becomes death and rebirth. They're going to have a revelation, and then they're going to achieve atonement, finally get the item that they were deemed to get on their quest or the task they were to complete. They're going to cross back over into their ordinary world. They're going to return changed. They're not that first person that they were before, but they have accomplished their task. So when I go through these notes, I want you to think about a film that you have seen. Films are going to be the easiest. It could be a novel. You can do that. Television shows are a little bit more difficult when you're learning the hero's journey. So any film, your DC, Marvel films, any Disney film, Pixar, those have the hero's journey plot structure in them. Now, I'm not saying they're the only ones. Most films have the hero's journey plot structure in the film. So a little interesting fact on Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey comes from a book called A Hero with 1,000 Faces. And Joseph Campbell did write that book. And George Lucas was actually struggling with how to finish the plot to Star Wars Episode 4, and then he read Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he saw the structure to the hero's journey, and he knew exactly how he was going to end Episode 4 of Star Wars. And so, for my Star Wars fans out there, you know that sci-fi and space films were not a hit in the 70s, so George Lucas was really taking some chances when he was producing and directing Star Wars. And so he actually released Star Wars at a couple of movie theaters, and people said it wasn't going to be a hit because it was another space film, but it was different. It wasn't like the other space films. So people were attracted to it. They flocked to the theaters. People waited in lines. They dressed up in costumes. They would watch it again and again. And so they had to add it to more theaters. And so Joseph Campbell, when he used the hero's journey in Star Wars, recognized that it worked. And so he kept using the same plot structure in the other Star Wars films. Now, we're going to move on to the rest of the hero's journey, and I'm going to walk you through the different steps. Now, it's not always to say that these steps are going to go in this exact order. They could happen in a different order. So while I'm talking you through this, I'm going to use several examples from several films. Remember that one film I told you to think about? I want you to see if you can think of where you may find the hero's journey in that film. And when you think of it, I want you to jot it off to the side in your notes under the example column. So if you look at your notes and you look at the far right column, it says example. Write the name of the film that you want to plot out right there. And then you're going to plot it out with me while we are walking through this lecture. So number one, the ordinary world. So remember that diagram. That hero is going to start off in the ordinary world. They're going to feel uneasy, uncomfortable, or unaware. And they're usually introduced to the audience sympathetically. Well, why do we feel bad for this character? Well, that happens so we can sympathize with them. They're usually in a terrible situation or a dilemma. I mean, think about how every Disney character, usually doesn't have a parental figure. This would also be where the hero is shown in a background of environment, heredity, and personal history. So we're really kind of getting to know the character still. It's kind of like the exposition here. In the ordinary world, what is their life like? And we're also introduced to a conflict here, or why the character may be stressed out. So, for example, in Harry Potter, the Chamber of Secrets, Harry Potter lives under the staircase, and he is treated badly by his cousin. And then in The Wizard of Oz, we see that Dorothy lives on the farm, and she has to do all of her chores, and she doesn't really get to explore her curiosities like she wants to. In Star Wars, we're introduced to Luke Skywalker, and we find out some about his personal life and then his stresses and conflicts as well. In Spider-Man's a good example with Peter Parker. We see his ordinary world, and he lives with his aunt and uncle. So a lot of times our hero is going to start off as the outcast or underdog of the story because they have to come out on top at the end. So that is why they are the outcast or underdog. All right, stage 2 is the call to adventure. So something is going to shake up the character's situation. It's either going to be from external pressures or from something rising up from deep within. So the hero must face the beginnings of change. So this is when their world goes completely crazy. Like Harry Potter, he starts discovering he has all these powers. Oh, and another good example is Matilda. If you've ever seen Matilda, this is when she starts discovering that she has powers. Percy Jackson he can start reading like Greek language, and he's called to go on an adventure. I'm talking about the film, not the novels. Also in The Wizard of Oz, is going to be Dorothy getting in the house in the storm. A storm is a symbol too, and we'll talk about that more with archetypes. But if a character is in a storm, storms just don't have a positive connotation behind them in any kind of symbolic meaning in literature or film. So think about the symbol of a storm in The Wizard of Oz. Also in Star Wars, we've got Luke Skywalker seeing the holographic of Princess Leia from R2-D2 saying, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." So Luke Skywalker stumbles upon R2-D2 and finds his call to adventure there. Now, oftentimes the character normally says, you know what, I am just an ordinary boy. I'm just an ordinary girl. And they refuse the call. So that's going to be what we call stage 3, refusal of the call. And that's when the hero feels the fear of the unknown and tries to turn away from the adventure, but it's very brief. So alternately, another character may express the uncertainty and danger ahead. So like I said, not every character is going to refuse the call, but they may stress the fact that their task or quest is dangerous. So for example, when Hagrid says, "You're a wizard, Harry," Harry Potter's like, "What, me? I'm just a regular boy." Percy Jackson says the same thing when he gets into Camp Half-Blood and crosses the threshold. He says, when he is told he's a demigod, he's like, "What? No, I'm just a regular boy," is what he says. The Hobbit, wow. The Hobbit, he literally refuses to go on an adventure. Like, that's the most bold example I can think of. But sometimes a character may have so much built up within them, like a grudge, that they're not going to refuse the call. They're just going to accept the fear of the unknown there, and they're going to go forth. So again, not all of these stages are going to happen in order, and they may not all happen, especially a refusal of the call. So stage 4, meeting with the mentor. Every hero has a mentor. And so in Harry Potter, we have Dumbledore. In The Wizard of Oz, we have Glinda the Good Witch. In Star Wars Episode 4, we've got Obi-Wan Kenobi. In The Karate Kid, we've got Mr. Miyagi. In The Lion King, we have Rafiki, and so forth. And so think about who the mentor would be in the film that you've chosen to plot out in the hero's journey. And also the mentor is going to be somebody that provides knowledge for the hero and helps them along their journey. Now, sometimes the hero may not be like a physical human. It could be like somebody, like a ghost or a figment of somebody's imagination, whispering advice into your hero's ear, or just showing up along the way of their path in different places. So stage 5 is going to be crossing the threshold. So this is when the hero literally leaves the ordinary world and goes into this special world that they are totally unfamiliar with. It's super uncomfortable for them. So just think about how you started high school, and the first day of school, you walked onto the campus of Bremen High School here, and you were probably a little bit fearful of the unknown. So literally your ordinary world would have been the middle school, because that's where you came from, and then you're crossing the threshold into a new special world, which would be high school. So this is where a hero goes from what they know to what they don't know. It's that unknown world. And so this is usually at the end of Act 1 if we have like a play going on with 3 different acts. And the hero does commit to leaving the ordinary world and living in the special world for a while so they can complete their task. So this would be like Harry Potter going into Hogwarts, Percy Jackson going into Camp Half-Blood, Dorothy going to Munchkin Land in order to get to Oz, Luke Skywalker leaving his home and learning the ways of the Force. Also, a character may not physically cross over a line, so just think about it in that sense. So like our movies that have athletes in them, what did they know beforehand, and then what is their special world? What are they training for? In Mean Girls is a good example. Katie's ordinary world is at home with her parents. She's from Africa, and then she meets her friends at her new school, and then crossing the threshold for her would be crossing into that clique and becoming a plastic. All right, that's going to be her fear of the unknown. She doesn't understand and know what it's going to take to be a plastic. All right, stage 6, tests, allies, and enemies. So this one is pretty simple. This is where the hero is tested several times. They learn different tasks in order to complete their quest. They meet their allies, and they kind of sort out who their enemies may be. Now, sometimes we may have an ally who turns out to be an enemy, or vice versa, an enemy who turns out to be an ally. And that fits into the category of certain character archetypes, which we will refer to in our archetype notes later. So here, this would be like Harry Potter. He establishes that Hermione and Ron Weasley are his friends, his allies, and then Draco Malfoy is his enemy. Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader is his enemy. And then for Dorothy, the Wicked Witch of the West is her enemy. Stage 7 is the approach. So how is the character, the hero, going to prepare for the major challenge in the special world? I mean, think about Shrek. Shrek's a good example too, because I'm talking about the first Shrek. He has to get his swamp back, and he has to go through all these tests, set aside who his allies and enemies are, and then he has to figure out an approach on how to get his swamp back. Harry Potter has to learn Quidditch. He has to learn certain spells and potions. Dorothy has to learn the way to Oz. And Luke Skywalker has to learn the ways of the Force. Moving on to number 8. So here, near the middle of the story, the character is going to enter a world in which he or she is unfamiliar with again, but they're going to cross that line and actually face fear or evil, his or her greatest fear. So near the middle of the story, the hero enters a central space in the special world and confronts death or faces his or her greatest fear. And out of this moment of death comes a new life. So this is going to be the point in the movie theater, or if you're at home watching a movie, this is the point where you're on the edge of your seat because you think the hero is about to die because they're having to battle it out with someone. And then after they battle it out with someone, the hero normally gets the reward. So that's stage 9, the reward. So the hero is going to take possession of the treasure won by facing death. There may be a celebration in this, but there's also danger of losing the treasure again. And this is important because the whole point being of this is just when you think it's over, it's not really over. It's never really over in a movie. If just because a hero has faced death or a villain doesn't mean they're free to go and the movie's over. We know that something is going to happen again because they have the reward that they came for and other people are still searching for it probably. So think about that. So this is going to be when there's fear of losing the treasure again. And then the hero is on the road back, which is stage 10. They're on the road back to complete their task, their quest, etc. And it's going to be about 3/4 of the way through the story. And the hero is driven to complete the adventure here. And most of the time, I'm going to say most, they leave the special world to go back to the ordinary world to complete the task, because sometimes the task is to bring something back to the ordinary world that was lost beforehand. But this is often where a chase scene happens and there's urgency and danger in the mission. So, a chase scene, I'm not talking about, it could be in the air if characters can fly. It could be in cars. It could be running. It could be, you name it. It's a chase scene. It's back and forth, and it's another battle where the hero faces his or her greatest fear. And it's that very last moment where you're thinking, is the hero really going to make it, or is this going to be a very tragic story? Stage 11 is where the resurrection occurs, and this is at the climax of the hero's journey. So at the climax, the hero is severely tested once more on the threshold of home, and he or she is purified by a last sacrifice, another moment of death and rebirth, but on a more spiritual level. And by the hero's action, the hero is different from the beginning, and the conflict from the beginning is finally resolved. So this is where the hero is resurrected. So when you think about resurrection, it means you are born again, you're lifted up. So if you think about the Lion King, when Simba defeats Scar in the end of the Lion King, Simba is literally walking up Pride Rock, which symbolizes resurrection, because when you're resurrected, you're lifted up. And it's also raining, which is a huge symbol for rebirth and baptism. So we're going to talk about that more with archetypes. But in that moment, normally, I'm going to say a lot of directors and screenwriters, they choose for a character to be resurrected through water. So pay attention to water. It's a very important symbol. If you don't learn anything in my class, hopefully you'll learn one thing, that water means rebirth, new beginnings, and baptism. And so lastly, when the character's conflict is resolved and they are born again spiritually, Or, it may be like literally they're born again. Maybe they're a superhero and they died and came back. I don't know. But think about how they have changed, and they're always going to return back to the ordinary world, but they're not going to be the same person that they were before. So this is where we get our underdog or, our outcast hero. They're not going to be the underdog or outcast anymore. They are the hero. They're changed. They've learned something. They're stronger, maybe not physically, but mentally. And so they're going to bear some element of the treasure that has the power to transform the world as the hero has been transformed. So most of the time, the hero goes back to the ordinary world. However, some heroes decide to stay in the special world. Harry Potter, he does go back and forth, but he does decide to stay in the special world, which would be Hogwarts. Percy Jackson goes back to Camp Half-Blood. Dorothy, she goes back to the ordinary world, but she's learned a lot about herself. And then Luke Skywalker, he's learned the ways of the Force. He stays in the special world. He doesn't want to go back to his ordinary world because he doesn't have a place there. So, and his family's gone. So think about it in that context. Does your hero go back to the ordinary world and stay, or do they stay in the special world as a changed hero? And so that concludes the notes for the hero's journey. Don't forget to plot out your examples in the right-hand column of your notes, and please feel free to email me if you have any questions. Oh, and also, sometimes the hero's journey does not end happily ever after, so goodbye. This is not happily ever after.